All right, so I want to talk about this book I've been reading. It's called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I think so far it's been a really beneficial book, especially for somebody who's trying to build a business right now and, get into points where it becomes hard to overcome some of the hard parts of it. But that's what this book kind of talks about a little bit. So I want to talk about those topics and why, if you're somebody in my position who's building business or training for a sport or anything like that, you should never give up. So for those who don't know, Napoleon Hill was an author from the early 1900s. He was basically the pioneer of self-help information, stuff like that. This book, despite being published in 1937, eventually grew to worldwide success, and it's still being published to this day. So in the beginning of the book, he lists people who have been successful, who have gained immense wealth throughout their lifetime. And throughout the book, he tells their stories and the factors that he believes allowed them to become successful. The unique part about the book, though, is that the factor, he doesn't explicitly say what it is, but he advises you in the beginning that it's up to you to figure out as you read. And so far, being about 15 pages in, I think I'm starting to get the idea of what it is, but that's the point of this documentation, and the point of me reading it is to really understand what that is and how I can utilize that. So some of the people he talks about, just to name a few, are Henry Ford, Woodrow Wilson, William Howard Taft, Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, among many others. So yeah, he says in the beginning, one of the first sentences is, "In every chapter of this book, mention has been made of the money-making secret which has made fortunes for hundreds of exceedingly wealthy men whom I've carefully analyzed over a long period of years." So yeah, obviously throughout the book he discusses many of these men and their success stories and how they gained this immense wealth or success, whatever it may be. But a story in the beginning that stuck out to me the most was the story of R.U. Darby. Basically, R.U. Darby had caught wind of the gold rush that was happening in the 1800s. And he lived in Maryland, but traveled out west to pursue gold mining. He spent money on equipment to mine the gold and actually found a vein in California that obviously had gold in it. So he began to dig and dig and dig, and eventually dug himself out of debt with the amount of gold that he dug. But it wasn't enough. And he continued to dig and continued to dig and continued, but he couldn't find anything more than that. After this, he unfortunately sold his equipment to somebody else, and that person who he sold it to went to the same exact vein, got an expert analysis on that vein, dug 3 more feet, and found more veins of gold than R.U. Darby had originally found, and made a fortune. So there's plenty of lessons to be pulled from this story, but obviously the most impactful one is to never give up. No matter how far away you might feel from your goal, you're right there on the cusp. You might be right there. You might be closer than you think. So it's really important to acknowledge where you're at. And no matter how far along you may feel on the timeline, you might be closer than you think. So it's important to not give up at all, because you don't want to end up like R.U. Darby, walking away from a fortune. I'll read a quote from the book that really stuck with me. "Before success comes in any man's life, he is sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. This is exactly what the majority of men do. Don't be like the majority of men. Keep going, because that's what will separate you from everybody else who's quit." So it's safe to say that this book will be impactful. But I also want to give an example of people who never gave up, and despite how far they were from success, they still eventually found it. So there are plenty of examples of this, of people not quitting, even when the odds were not in their favor. So I just want to list a few. Colonel Sanders, responsible for KFC. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books. Walt Disney, founded Disney. But a success story that stuck out to me a lot was Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was the inventor of the light bulb, and in the early stages of his career, he failed thousands of times when inventing the light bulb, but he never gave up on it. A famous quote of his is, "I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." And I think this is such an amazing quote and such an amazing mentality, because it goes back to my self-talk video, right? If you tell yourself you're a failure, if you tell yourself each time that you fail, "Oh, that's horrible, man, I failed, like this sucks," you're going to program your subconscious into thinking that that's normal and that's okay. You want to do the exact opposite. You want to tell yourself that this failure is one step closer to success, that this failure is good because it's an indicator that you're closer to success. Whatever you have to say to convince yourself that this failure is a good thing and to keep going will do you wonders in the future. Everybody fails. everybody fails. Everybody feels like they might not be close to succeeding. But it's important to remember that if you're somebody that's in a position training for a sport, building a business, doing anything that takes long, strenuous hours, just keep going. You might be closer than you think. So if you're somebody that's struggling to find motivation to continue on their journey, I hope this helped out, and please just don't give up. Thank you.